I talked recently about how people across history have come to the same conclusion or had the same experience of what the Tibetan Buddhists call Rigpa, the ever-present pristine awareness of the nature of mind. The Tibetans, along with Plotinus and Chuang-Tzu and the Upanishads and many, many more, all seem to be pointing to the same thing, the underlying ground of reality. But if it's ever present, then how come so many of us struggle to see it? That's exactly what one person asked in the comments. They asked, how do we access this ground of reality? So today I want to talk about that, but because it's such a beautiful day outside, I thought instead of just sitting inside at a desk, I'll go for a walk and take you with me. Rocky, should we go for walkies? You go for walkies? Come on then. Come on then. It's pretty amazing because across every tradition, Buddhism, Taoism, Christian mysticism, Hinduism, Sufism, the same doorways keep appearing. Let's walk through them. The first doorway is mindfulness. The Pali word is sati, which is often translated as remembering. It is remembering what is actually happening right now. Because most of the time, we aren't here. We're in the conversation we had yesterday, or the thing we need to do tomorrow. The mind is almost never where the body is, and mindfulness closes that gap. It brings attention back to this, to now, to the direct, unfiltered experience of being alive in this moment. When attention settles into the present, just resting, the noise quietens. And underneath the noise, something is already there. Something that wasn't produced by the quietening. It was always present. It was just obscured. The Zen tradition has a phrase, original face. The face you had before your parents were born, before the story of you began. The second doorway is self-inquiry. And this one is perhaps the most direct of all. It comes primarily from the Advaita Vedanta tradition, and most famously from Ramana Maharshi, who spent decades sitting in stillness. He said, don't try to quieten the mind. Don't try to achieve a state. Instead, ask one question. Who am I? Turning attention back toward the one who is having this experience. When a thought arises, a worry or a plan or a memory, don't follow it outward. Instead, ask, who is having this thought? The answer is always me. And then, who is this me? And you follow it with curiosity, like a dog following a scent, but turned around, following its own trail back toward the source. What Ramana found, and what countless people who've practiced this have found, is that when you look for the I, you can't find it as an object. You find awareness itself, open and boundless, already present. He said there is no reaching the self. If the self were to be reached, it would mean that it is not here and now. The self, the ground, isn't somewhere else. The inquiry doesn't take you there. It reveals that you were never anywhere else. Closely linked to self-inquiry is seeing the ego clearly. I think sometimes the ego gets a bad reputation. Buddhism talks about dissolving it, and Advaita talks about seeing through it. Christian mysticism talks about dying to the self. But I think it's more helpful to see the ego as a case of mistaken identity rather than as an enemy. The ego is the sense of being a separate self, a bounded me that needs to be protected. It needs to be validated. It needs to be maintained. And this sense of separation is very useful. It helps us to navigate the world. It helps us to maintain relationships and remember who we are from one day to the next. But it becomes a problem when you mistake it for the whole story. When you begin to see the ego, to catch it doing its thing, seeking validation, defending its story, comparing, contracting, it loses some of its grip. It doesn't disappear immediately or completely, but a little bit, and gradually, and in the gaps the ground shows through. The fifth doorway might be the most ancient of all, because long before any formal tradition existed, human beings found something in nature, in the forest, the ocean, the mountain, the night sky, something that loosened the grip on the ordinary mind. Alan Watts described it beautifully. He said that when we look at nature deeply, we stop seeing objects and start seeing processes. The tree isn't a separate thing, it's a continuous movement between soil and water and light and air. The river isn't a thing, it is water in motion, never the same from one moment to the next. And when the mind relaxes into that, the sense of separation starts to go away. The boundary between me in here and the world out there begins to soften. The Upanishads say it quite explicitly. He who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings no longer hides in fear. Nature just shows it directly to anyone who's paying attention. The bird on the branch, the spider weaving its web, the stray cat who visits when you're alone in the woods. All of it is the same life, the same awareness, moving through different forms. And that recognition naturally extends beyond the human. When we feel ourselves as part of nature rather than observers of it, the circle of compassion begins to widen, past tribe, past species, to the whole community of sentient beings that shares this one life with us. The fifth doorway might surprise some people, because when we think about accessing the ground of reality, we often think of meditation techniques, philosophical inquiry, mystical states. We don't always think of love. But every tradition places love or compassion at or near the centre of the path. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote almost entirely about love. He didn't write about romantic love so much. It was more fundamental than that. The pull of the soul towards its source. He described the mystic path as dissolving into the beloved, and the beloved is the ground itself. Jesus, when asked about the greatest commandment, said, "Love God with everything you are, and love your neighbour as yourself." As yourself, because at the deepest level, the neighbour isn't separate. And in Buddhism, the cultivation of metta, loving kindness, begins with oneself, extends to those close to us, then to strangers, then to those who we find difficult, then to all sentient beings without exception. Why all sentient beings? Because awareness, the ground we're trying to access, does not stop at human boundary. The same consciousness that appears as a human experience appears in every creature capable of experience. Compassion for all beings isn't just ethics, it is recognition. Love and compassion seem to function as a kind of solvent for the ego. The ego is, at its core, the sense of separation, and love, at its core, is the dissolution of separation. When you genuinely love, when something opens in you toward another being, whether human or otherwise, the boundary thins. The Sufi tradition says, the heart is the organ of divine perception. The open heart perceives what the defended, contracted ego cannot. All of these doorways, mindfulness, self-inquiry, seeing the ego, nature, love, they all share one thing. They don't take you to the ground, they remove what's covering it. Because the ground of reality isn't something you need to travel toward. It isn't a state you need to attain. It isn't reserved for monks who have meditated for 40 years, or sages who have renounced the world, or people who have had dramatic mystical experiences. The author of The Cloud of Unknowing, writing in 14th century England, described a presence so immediate, so close that all concepts fall away in its presence. Something closer than thought, closer than feeling, closer than the sense of being a self. Ramana Maharshi said, "The self is always the self." The Mandukya Upanishad describes Turiya, the fourth state, the ground in which waking, dreaming, and deep sleep all arise. It was always there. You were always in it. You just didn't recognize it as what you are. And Chuang-Tzu, in his characteristically oblique way, tells us that the sage doesn't reach the Tao by great effort. The sage stops getting in the way. The doorways I've talked about aren't techniques for manufacturing an experience. They are ways of stopping the interference, of getting out of the way, of letting what was already there be recognized. So how do we access the ground of reality? We pay attention. We come back to the present. We follow the sense of I back to its source. We notice the ego for what it is without becoming attached to it. And we love genuinely and expansively. And we do all of this to recognize where we've already been, because the ground of reality isn't some kind of destination that you have to get to. It is right here and right now. If you'd like to explore any of these doorways more deeply, particularly self-inquiry and the direct path, then watch this video next.